Hello and welcome back to another Strange New Worlds review. The last episode that is going to be delayed for a while, and then also the first episode that actually sounds like it could have been made in TOS. I mean, look at that title. Ghosts of Illyria, I think it is. I mean, that's a weak TOS title, which, as we all know, are the best titles in Star Trek. But it's still a TOS title. Probably an interesting one for me. Basically, as I mentioned before, I'm not sure how I feel about number one is a character who we really don't know a lot about, but it's the one thing I feel we really know something about her is from the Short Trek Q&A, which I hate because we don't talk about Spock, but, Spock, but also Una delivers a line that I can't remember exactly, but it's basically where she tells Spock to hide her weird, and the way she's gotten this far in life is by hiding her weird, which, I mean, I've talked about this before in this review series, like, no. Just no. But the description sounds like, it's an interesting one. Sounds like just normal classic TOS episode, contagion on the ship, only one crew. I've seen this episode like 3 or 4 times. But then you have like Una's harboring some dark secret, and so it's like I feel that dark secret does it say dark? No, it just says secret. That secret is going to be like the deciding on how I feel about this episode. I don't know. But hey, we don't judge the book by its cover. I'm just saying I think this will be an interesting one for me. I'm not sure there's going to be a middle ground in this episode. Yes, I'll say, as I alluded to before, episodes 4 and 5 should go out kind of as normal. The Thursdays, like, when do they normally come out? 5 or 6? I don't know. Sometime early evening Thursday. Episode 6, I have a final in the morning. I move out the next day. I don't know if my roommate's gonna be clear. I don't know how that's gonna work. But that one might be delayed. Then 7 and 8 are fine. 9 and literally every review after 9, I don't know how they're gonna work. Because after that point, I start a proper job, which I think I can still probably do on Wednesday night. They might even be coming out earlier, but I don't know quite how that's gonna work. We might have to work around and see what happens. But Strange New Worlds arguably be one of the most popular view-wise reviews I could do for quite some time. And it's the one that I have so much trouble with, of course. This couldn't have been Picard. But anyway, yeah. I would say I'm about to watch the video. I'm not. I'm about to wait like 40 minutes, go take a major field exam, and then in like 4 or 5 hours, I'm gonna watch this and come back and review it. But yeah, just wanted to update you. This should be interesting. I think you need a bit of context here, because between the clip you just saw and actually sitting, not right now, but sitting down to watch this episode, I got in a bad mood, right? That test went fine. But I basically, the place I had lined up to move into after the dorm, a keystone of savings and basically the entire life's plan after now. It looks like I'm not getting any more. I've basically been a bit evicted before moving in, which is maybe not as major a life disruption as it might sound, but I got in a bad mood, and as I said, this episode was like teetering. What a bad mood for me means is I went into this, I even tweeted, well, let's see how good Strange New Worlds is. Like, I went in because the bad mood means that all those little things, the fact that the rooms are cavernous, the technology discrepancies, the minor plot things are gonna blow up. And basically about I mean, I'm sure you've watched shows in a bad mood before. Everyone is much more of a critic, even the critics in a bad mood. And early on, yeah, I was seeing that. I was gonna address it in the review, but I'm like, this is a biased review. This is gonna be far from unbiased. And, you have this right here, which is kind of a list of all the bad things in this episode, which is true. They are there. There are plot things. There are general things that, there's plenty to complain about, right? But then, particularly in the latter half of the episode, you also got out this page, which is all the good things, right? And, generally, there's very few, if any, episodes that are going to be all bad and no good, right? And you look at the list of good things that just kept growing longer in the end of the episode. This is what I thought in the beginning. How do I reconcile these? Is it going to be a bad episode, or a good episode, and my mood, just, going in that the mood is going to make it a bad episode. But I look at this list of good things. I don't do this often. I think the last time I did this was Heaven Sent in Doctor Who, quite some time ago. But when I look at the list of good things, that was an episode of Star Trek that has done things I have wanted Star Trek to do for ages, has corrected one of, if not the biggest moral mistake Starfleet has ever made, and beyond that has done so in a more general moral Discovery's moral example, the classics moral allegory. That was a episode of Star Trek whose goods were so far above and beyond the standard that the cons get brushed away no matter how bad they are. And all that stuff of the things I wanted to do, and there was more than one. That was exceptional. That was also my homework from a few days ago. But I don't need it anymore. Let me get a bit more specific. Genetic engineering is something basically from the beginning, since Space Seed. Well, I guess it wasn't genetic engineering, it was genetic breeding, but eugenics, broadly. Actually, I'm gonna have to look up the dictionary definition. I'm gonna have to be real careful here. Okay, I'm glad I did that, just so we're all on the same page. Eugenics is defined is the study of how to arrange reproduction, and more broadly genetic engineering, within a human population to increase the occurrence of heritable characteristics regarded as desirable. Eugenics, from basically the beginning, from Space Seed, Starfleet has hated, rightfully so. Eugenics, all across the world. I don't know if it goes further back than the 20th century. It might, in less scientific, less technological ways, we'll put it. Eugenics is a discipline adopted by the Nazis and America in the height of its racial persecution, and it's a racist discipline that is bad. It's bad. Since probably the Wrath of Khan-ish, it bled in. TNG was okay with genetic engineering. There's the one episode, season 2, because that's Pulaski, with the kids who are genetically engineered. No one bats an eye. But since about around after that episode, Star Trek is kind of lumped in all genetic engineering with eugenics. And it's gone, eugenics is bad, therefore all genetic engineering is bad. Which is wrong. For an allegory, it's sort of a nukes are bad, therefore nuclear energy is bad. Inherently argument. There are plenty of genetic engineering things. You might even argue the majority, although in an infinite set of possible modifications, that are bad. You can get into gray areas like designer babies, just sort of stuff like that you're not making them better in terms of absolute ability and stuff like that, but they're unnecessary, right? But you then have kind of a middle bit, which is largely what the eugenics wars are talking about, which are improving human, strength. You make stronger humans, you make smarter humans, you make humans who can, hold their breath longer. You just kind of improve the abilities that humans already have. But that's sort of what the eugenics wars were about, and when they did that in the 90s in Star Trek, it brought on all the side effects, right? That's why they banned genetic engineering. But let's push that line further, because before that, you have objectively good genetic engineering. And, you have things like curing genetic disabilities. But deadly ones will go. You can get a bit more gray with things like mental disabilities. Geordi's blind. We can fix that. They just choose not to. And there are examples, the B'Elanna's in Tom's Baby had some sort of spine issue. They just genetically engineer that away. And for a huge chunk of Star Trek, just kind of genetic engineering equals bad. You had, of course, through TNG after season 2. You had Deep Space Nine, and would hold that belief. You had Bashir, who was kind of one of those accidents where, hey, genetic engineering, because it's illegal and unregulated and unstudied, usually causes defects. Bashir happened to live. They kind of addressed that. But largely, it was still genetic engineering's bad. Bashir happened to work out. Voyager, I can't recall if it did much with genetic engineering, but still, it's just that bad evil. It's lumped in with the bad practices of eugenics. Enterprise gets interesting, where I really love Enterprise's how they dealt with eugenics, because it is the earliest point in the timeline as a show. You had still the very strict eugenics or genetic engineering policies. It's sort of, I suppose, an America in like 2002, like right after 9/11, or the world more, is going to be much more like strict and cautious as opposed to nowadays, where we still live under a lot of the stuff that was a result of 9/11, particularly if you're American, but it's not quite as prevalent, or maybe fanatical might be the word, where in Enterprise, genetic engineering the ban was absolutely fanatical. There was none. You couldn't fix even diseases or genetic defects, deadly genetic defects. You just let them die. And I loved, they had Archer's dad, who died by something that was curable, but it was you had to genetically engineer something to get rid of the disease, and so Archer's dad died when he didn't have to. It was just the principle of genetic engineering is bad, therefore this is bad. And the actual result of that Enterprise episode was a letting up on the restriction of genetic engineering. And that's why, in the later series, you can fix a spine. You can get rid of those. You can use genetic engineering to get rid of disease. If it's an option between die or genetic engineering solely to get rid of the thing that's going to kill you, the Enterprise episode was them stepping back and realizing that abstinence is very, 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 very rarely the answer. But, you still always had that tie. But basically, the reason it's such a problem to me, it's a fictional world. I mean, it's helps plot-wise for a lot of things that the Federation bans genetic engineering, but it's the same problem for me where it's a real-world damaging position. And sci-fi does it all over. Doctor Who does it as well, where we're entering the point, we're at the point where we need to make these decisions about genetic engineering. And we need to make these decisions about these medical practices especially. And growing up with the generations of everyone's just, lumping that genetic engineering, just all genetic engineering is inherently bad, is going to cause problems. It's, going to be harmful. It's going to ruin, if not end lives. But I also look at pushing it further ahead, where there's currently no reason whatsoever that we know of to believe that you can't genetically engineer this species into immortality. And there is every test, everything we've done to believe that you can do that. We may hit a wall eventually, but, to stop aging, to expand the health span, to expand the lifespan, yeah, we have every reason to believe that's possible. And the stories, such as the first season of Picard, anytime the Doctor, a functionally immortal person, berates people for being insane, trying to become functionally immortal, it is causing death. There is a cutoff in human history of people who were born too soon to live as long as they wanted, and everyone else. It is an inevitability, because if it's illegal, well, if it's possible, someone's going to do it underground. And the thing about functionally immortal people is they're going to be around longer than you are. And obviously, functionally immortal people are fine with being functionally immortal, and it's just an ever-growing population that eventually becomes the majority. I can link you to amazing things. Kurzgesetz's got some. I'll put these in the description. Kurzgesetz's got some much better articulated arguments. CGB Grey has an animation of an excellent allegory, The Fable of the Dragon Tyrant, but it's something I get really passionate about because every day we don't work on the project, which we have the technological ability to start the project, is, well, how many people die every day? Approximately 20-something million people, and growing, who just are going to die of old for no reason. It just pushes that cutoff date one day past. This is the first thing I've seen that was an argument for that kind of medical genetic engineering, the non-eugenics genetic engineering, outside of just arguments for, if that makes sense. Like that CGB Grey thing I mentioned, those allegories and stuff don't count. But more broadly, it's the first episode of Star Trek, sci-fi television, anything that's gone, this is stupid. This is a prejudice that doesn't make sense, just causes loads of unnecessary death and suffering, and is just persecuting people, it's hurting people, and we shouldn't do it. Like, obviously it's not going to change the rules, because we have this future where you still can't do the genetic engineering. But it was so refreshing to see a load of people like, no, this is a stupid rule. Like, genetically engineered people are people. You can do it without any of these side effects, which, might I point out, all that superior ability breeds superior ambition stuff is fiction created by the Star Trek universe and not supported, in fact, in any way. And it was just refreshing to see that. But beyond that, it wasn't entirely a genetic engineering argument. There are a lot of things. You could substitute this for any persecuted group, really. In the past, I suppose in the future, although you can't really cite those examples. In the present, it had a lot of tones of people with any sort of hidden attribute, autism, mental disability, queerness, in the LGBT sense, anything. There's so much that any persecuted group could get from this episode. And again, so much that discovery, like, yeah, show the world you want to be, but not in the TNG sense, like this is utopia, in the sense of, in the world today, this is what you should be like, this is how we get to that utopia, but still maintaining a show that is within that utopia. I suppose it gets a bit of a pass in that prejudice against genetic engineered species is, all over Star Trek. I mean, you're not ruining Utopia by keeping that prejudice. Or at least you're not ruining it any more than the other shows. It's compared that to Picard. My review of episode, is it 5, 6? One of those has the global suicide hotlines in the description and linked in places because it had a storyline of Agnes Girardi, who was, the weirdo, the misfit, whatever, not many friends, the outcast of society. And it had a storyline of remove your individuality, just to get rid of everything that makes you you, for the sake of joining a collective where you will feel better because you are now part of a greater whole and not an individual. It is a cult. It is damaging, and it was so bad that I ultimately gave up on the series because it was a scary message. It was, and the fact that they followed through, that I know she does create a new collective, she does become a Borg queen, because after being drugged, like, just had her hormones messed with manually to make her feel good, like, compare that to this, which was an acceptance of who you are. It was a message of go out into the world and be you and find the people who will accept you for it. And if you try and be you, you will find those people, and you will be surprised at how many people are out there who will accept you for you. And beyond that, it also showed probably the real world feelings of doing that, where she's starting out, getting out there and being herself. She's doubting herself. I mean, rightfully so. So if we go into a Star Trek perspective for a second, like, yeah, she lied to get where she was. She withheld information, and it almost got the entire crew killed. Like, it was great to see going against that, the ends justify the means. If it all worked out in the end, we're fine. Thing that every episode of Star Trek has done.
The only reason you're not in the brig is because you saved lives.
It was great going against that. But and then from the moral perspective, this isn't done here. It's episodic storytelling with serialized characterization. We're going to go out through the rest of this series and see number one become herself more publicly. We're going to see people support her in that. We're going to see battles of prejudice. We're going to get a drumhead or a measure of a man. Like, we're going to get those episodes at some point, and Starfleet's gonna find out at some point. We're gonna get these confrontations. We'll get the people defending her. We're going to get her defending herself. The Outcast is another one. Like, we'll get that type of episode, and I can just see the future of where we can see this journey of learning to become yourself, which is something that, until we reach that utopia, is always going to be topical, and not so much a guide in the sense that, when you become yourself, you should doubt the sincerity of others, I guess, but in just that relation, and like, for people who are starting to become themselves, they can see, they can relate, they can know they're not alone, or they can at least see their experiences being represented. Off the top of my head, is this the best moral episode of a Star Trek? Like, I guess that you could argue something like the drumhead is important, although not nearly as relevant to me now as it was back in the 80s. Like, no, there are good ones, but this is up there. This is like one of the best handling of a topic and example, because it's just all that layers. It's got everything great that like these sorts of episodes have, but just layer on top of layer of things being done right. And as I look at my old homework assignment representing bad things lying down on the floor, just tearing up to pieces, like, yes, the last time I have gone, this is so good, the complaints, which are there, barely obvious often, and numerous, the last time I did that was Heaven Sent. In Heaven Sent is a Series 9 episode of Doctor Who that came out 7 years ago in 2015. Good for very different reasons. But, yeah, I mean, it's been a long time. Granted, I didn't watch it in 2015, but at that point I was pretty caught up in Doctor Who. It was like maybe 2016, 2017 I would have watched it. We do have a slight problem, though, and that if I've torn up all of my complaints, I'm kind of not left with anything else to talk about. No, let's go to Dr. M. Bengal. Okay, let's let in some complaints, right? That we've acknowledged, we've torn them up, we've thrown them aside, we say they don't matter, right? A lot of it, the recontextualization of Illyria. Ghosts of Illyria, by the way, I've just realized, fantastic multiple meaning title. The knowledge that Una's on an Illyrian recontextualizes a lot. The problems I'm about to go into, but also that Q&A short trek completely recontextualizes and adds depth, makes it a lot better. But as I said, the bad things early on in the episode, I was really annoyed by the lack of, I'd call it professionalism, but honestly responsibility in both Una and Dr. M. Bengal, where like she saw the light thing, she knew she was infected and didn't tell the doctors, which then means that, they'll waste time looking for a cure in her that doesn't exist, or at least you don't think it does at this point in the episode. I guess it technically does. You could argue she withheld it, and so they didn't get the cure, but like okay, her actions make sense in retrospect. But, initially going in, watching this as a human who was in command of these lives, they were atrocious. Dr. Mbengal had a lot of similar things where, the guy went to work on the transporter, the engineering guy, and he kicked him out, clearly because he was hiding something. He's putting the lives of everyone almost in danger and, again, wasting resources when the problem is there. He's just obscuring it. Yeah, they wouldn't have found a cure. There are arguments, knowing it's his daughter and the fact that nothing can be done by revealing that fact now. Yes, it makes it better, but it does make for some harder viewing on a first go. You can make an argument for that recontextualization, maybe making you rethink your own beliefs, values, your judgments. There's value in that. But by and large, when you have something like that, it's going to recontextualize the past, you still need it to be enjoyable the first time through. If you want an example, Heaven Sent is an amazing example of an episode that recontextualizes itself, but is an astounding, entirely separate episode on the first watch through. But I do think it's interesting, as much as I'm trying to hold back my little criticisms on the logistics, of having the daughter in the transporter room. I mean, it's the guy who invented the transporter and Enterprise. I don't know his name. Wheelchair, black guy. I can't remember. But he had a son who was kind of trapped somewhere in weird transporter beam stuff. It's basically the same plot line. You could devote more time to it. I'm not going to complain too much. I think Una's unique. Not everything necessarily has to be the same. I mean, Una's a lot like Bashir. Different enough, but similar. I guess you could say Una is to Bashir, is Data is to Spock. But it is interesting, we might come back to these. You can get story out of it. It could be interesting to develop. It could be heartbreaking. I mean, there are bits, you could really have the first the first good, proper, make you cry episode since probably Simulant? No, someone pointed out to me, Terra Prime. With the kid. I guess it won't spoil with the kid. No, Terra Prime can have some make you cry moments. But a good solid episode, we haven't had one of those since Enterprise. And I wanna watch an episode of Star Trek that makes me cry. The last time I watched The Visitor, I was I know I'm gonna cry. But I sat down, the opening music, that unique soundtrack started, and just that alone, the music, made me cry. And then 45 minutes later, the episode ended, and I was still crying. I had just never stopped. I want another episode like that. That is high standards. I have called The Visitor the single finest standalone piece of science fiction ever written. So that is a high bar to cross. But I'd love a good, proper, half a life, real life, fake life. What's the Doctor's Holographic Family episode called? I love that episode. Has my favorite ever review of a Star Trek episode. The review was something like, I cried, my wife cried, you cried, my houseplant cried, everybody cried, which is just the best review I've ever heard. Is that why I can't feel my legs? No. I mean, yeah, it's interesting. We haven't done too much with it now, but yeah, I'm loving it being set up. It's that is it string serialization? I kind of call it episodic serialization, where, the TNG Klingon arc, I guess the 80s and 90s Klingon arc, Deep Space Nine continued it, of kind of the Civil War stuff. Well, you had to get a new Chancellor who was Gowron, which led to Civil War stuff, which led to weird stuff with Worf and his brother, that led to, et cetera, all the way to the ending of Deep Space Nine, where Gowron's storyline is finally resolved. Really keeping the story light. I think maybe Strange New Worlds might be a show where a lot of people have just seen modern stuff is coming and then are going to go back to the classics. So maybe we'll try and keep that light. We got to stop talking about the complaints. I'm going to go into the scene by scene, I think. I might address a little bit, some little haha sort of things, not get too big into my big complaints. But I just have to say now, Starfleet really didn't know. Really? Okay, that's all, we'll go there. In case you somehow don't realize, that was in reference to Una not being human, and the Doctor not knowing, It's on the floor. It's on the floor. Why do we have a previously on? Did episode 2 have one? Like, I don't remember it, but this is just like, is it just to see in case you skipped an episode on accident? Like, I don't remember this episode, but again, it's episodic. You kind of can skip the episodes. That's the point. Never skip episodes unless it's Shades of Grey. But never skip episodes. In my bad mood, I knew I was going to hate this episode when they went to an Illyrian colony, and then I realized it's actually Illyrians. God, I hope I learned that name. But it's just a bit too similar to Illyrian, Guinan species. And I was like, oh, they genetically engineer themselves to enhance their abilities. I thought this was lore on like how Illyrians got their weird powers, and ooh, that fueled my bad mood. Was anyone else real confused by this scene and thought that was like a window and the guy bashed the window open and then like air didn't start blowing through? It took me quite a while to realize this was just a light panel. But, maybe that's why some of them should be purple, right? Space isn't purple, but I thought that was like the sun or something shining in. It was I don't know, that confused me a bit. I'm also just gonna say now, as we go through these clips, like, is it just me, or were all the sets way darker in this episode than they've been before? Because, like, Strange New Worlds is amazingly lit. It is so white, but even this corridor, it feels like they've toned the lights down to kind of exaggerate the lights, like, for the point of the episode. But it felt really weird that just for today, everyone had their lights at like 25%. Yes, the crew quarters are way too big, but I really like this idea of like the sliding, concealed, presumably real soundproof space. I mean, I don't know what woke Uhura up, but that space of like just the private stuff. Lower Deck should have that. Like, why doesn't Lower Decks have that when everyone's sleeping in the hallways? Like, I want that for my room. Back when I used to have, like, a bunk bed thing. Well, not a bunk bed, but a bed that could just go on the top bunk. I had, like, raised curtains down for something like that. Like, this is amazing. Like, Cerritos, where is this? Oh, hang on a second. On the floor, right here. It's one of those scraps of paper I ripped up. I know that, it's kind of, this happens a lot, but, like, this is them turning the lights off on the ship. This is lighter than my dorm can get sometimes. Like, I get the commuter monitor, but why not just have a commuter monitor lighted up? Discoveries had really dark, in the literal sense, scenes, like when they board the Glen. You could do a flashlight thing to increase suspense when, like, she's trying to see what's up in the transporters or going to engineering, and it's like a spooky corridor. She has to look behind the corners. Is it like too scary for the kids or something, maybe? Like, that would have freaked the me out who like couldn't actually watch TOS and kind of had to listen to it like behind the sofa thing. I was scared of everything as a kid. But it felt weird to me that this was them with all the lights off. Like, that's light. That's a lit room. I'm gonna have to clean these scraps of paper up after this. I have just noticed as well, that painting is the Daedalus? I don't remember what they call it. It's the ball ship, which I'm pretty sure was canon before, but it certainly is now. I don't remember. If I can tell the walls are white, then there is too much light in the room. That is not a dark room. I feel like the twist that the ghost people were the colonists was obvious from the beginning. I get in universe you might not make that logical leap, but hey, if your job is like especially TOS style Star Trek stories, then you think you might, suggest these possibilities. However, I loved Spock's kind of thing at the end where it's like, well, there's one of two possibilities. Either for some interaction before, these people that chose not to help the colonists, or they are the colonists. I actually love it for two reasons. For one, yeah, it makes sense. It's a very real scientific thing, but like I guess it's sort of one reason together. It's also logical. Spock, we all love Spock. TOS Spock and Vulcans in general are god-awful at logic. They fail the most basic logic. My uncle really, really, really wants me to make a video about how Vulcans suck at logic, because they do. I'm not quite sure about T'Pol. I'd have to look, but I guess that era of Vulcans was kind of unlogical. Yes, unlogical, not illogical. They were kind of unlogical in places. Like, they were logical, but with passion. They were dicks. That's the word I'm looking for. They were dicks. But they were the stereotypical Rick and Morty fan of like that. Oh my god, Enterprise era Vulcans are Rick and Morty fans. It's like we're like way smarter than you. We understand this sort of stuff. That's amazing. But anyway, like this is, I feel, the first time I've seen Spock actually do logic. This was an episode where I quite enjoyed Ethan Peck's performance as Spock. I mean, I still see the Ethan Peck's Spock. I'm not gonna say the Ethan Peck I hate, because I don't really have any opinions about Ethan Peck. But like the Ethan Peck Spock that I hate, I still see that person in front of me. But like, this is the sort of thing I would understand of all the comments of like Spock's relative or whatever. Is it his daughter, wife, sister? I can't remember. Who like have really praised the performance. I'm like, yeah, that's a recasted Spock that can never be Leonard Nimoy. No one can, but that's the best you can get. Just a shame we don't talk about Spock. When is the Spock Amok episode? I don't know, but we don't talk about Spock. I'd like to point out, this is why we don't talk about Spock, because even when I try and compliment this Spock, I end up critiquing and hating on this Spock. And that is why we don't talk about Spock. No. No. There's 4 no's. Go about Bruno. No. There's 3 no's, but Bruno ends in a... We don't talk about Spock. I don't know if this is on location somewhere. If it is, it's probably famous. But I feel like this is an example of the great usage of their LCD screen, if this is it. But I feel like they've probably used it in a lot of places in the episode where I don't notice. And that's what you want, because it fits, it makes sense with this setting, this weird outpost colony thing, that kind of middle of nowhere field, the Washington State rest stop on the road look, like, is what you want. And so, yeah, I'm always going to praise these great uses until I stop seeing bad ones. I think I enjoy, again, going back to that real world reasoning behind this episode, the person who's hated their genetic the person stuck in the prejudice for, I don't really want to say good reasons, because there's never a good reason to be prejudiced, but like incredibly understandable reasons, I suppose. Reasons that you don't just go, oh, you're dumb kind of thing for. But I like, for one, this dynamic of, the two. Also, that like, there will be people like that in the real world, if you're talking any persecuted group, who like won't accept it, or will kind of be of that group. I don't think this woman's genetically engineered, which is weird, being a descendant of... Well, wait, he's an ancestor. Does an ancestor have to be in your bloodline? Or, like, is my uncle my ancestor? But I think you could get some good stories out of this, some development, some your bloodline doesn't matter at all. I always find the interesting argument is that the Hitlers... There are a few Hitlers still alive, directly related to, of course, Adolf Hitler. Not many, but there are a few. And all of them have sworn off having kids so that the bloodline of the Hitlers ends within the next few decades. Which is an interesting philosophy, because most people could go, I understand why, but that philosophy is inherently an acknowledgement that your ancestry matters, and that being related to Hitler somehow changes something about you, which is ultimately the message that people like Hitler try to tell. And so these messages of, oh, she's related to Khan, no one cares that she's related to Khan, but like, Khan is associated with the bad thing in society, and she kind of hates herself because of it. Like, I feel she needs some arc of realizing that she's related to Khan, so what? I'm dating someone who used to believe they were a direct descendant of Rudolf Hess, one of Hitler's right-hand men, and I still intended on taking the name because it literally does not matter at all. If anything, I think if it was, I mean, again, this kind of is arguing that there is a change, but like, if anything, it's better to take the Hess name because, well, this is a pride flag on my wall right here. And the fact that I don't think being a Hess matters, but a Hess having descendants who go directly against what he believes in and he would care, it's like that, I feel, is the ultimate thing. Which I suppose would mean that her being against genetic engineering is the same, but it's kind of, ooh. That's a real complex argument that 50 minutes, I don't have time to get into. But the point is, I think she needs an arc of, like, getting developed, you know? God, I'm loving it. Episodic storytelling with serialized personalities. I'd say it's been a while. That's Lower Decks, isn't it? It's also sort of Prodigy. But it feels good. I have just seen this weird chair, which for some reason reminded me that the little blood taker thing is 100% a hot glue gun, which took me out of it a bit, but it's better than the, like, spray bottles McCoy had on the wall. And I know that in one of the reboot movies, don't ask me which one, in a corridor of the Enterprise, there is a, like, Dasani hand dryer unit thing that I saw on Reddit once. I love the comments that's just like, no, oh my god, that's just obviously a hand dryer. I'll put it on screen if I can. Like, it's just, that's what that is, unmistakably just a hand dryer. So it's kind of fun when you get things like that, but like, that was just a hot glue gun. And with that, as you can tell, with that, we're at the end of the review. Yeah, I mean, I was in a bad mood. I was supposed to hate this episode, and it was a top form episode, but even before it was a top form episode, I was still enjoying it largely and acknowledging that a lot of my complaints were because I was in a bad mood, which says something about the quality of the show. You can't do that for just any show. I mean, a bad show you're always going to hate, but like a mediocre show, or I suppose a mediocre episode, if you're in a bad mood, you're going to hate it. And the fact that while I was still in a bad mood and these recontextualizations hadn't happened yet, and I was still going like, this is a pretty good episode, you know, it's at least alright, that speaks volumes to the show's quality. I hope this is one where people go back and watch the originals because of it. I mean, actually, God, if it weren't for tying into season 2 of Discovery, this would be a perfect first Star Trek. You watch this, then you go to TOS, and you can kind of continue the standard one if you need that modern thing to get into you. Why does it have to tie into season 2 of Discovery, the worst season of Star Trek ever made? But I mean, yeah, this is just an exceptional Star Trek, and I am very much looking forward to being on air. So, yeah, I hope you enjoyed. I will see you next week. Undelayed. I mean, this one wasn't really delayed too long, but hopefully without any delays. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Whew! For Memento Mori. That's not Spock a Muck, that's a Pike episode if I've ever heard one.